أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful. Verily, our praise is due to Allah. We praise Him, we seek His aid, and we ask for His forgiveness. We seek refuge in Allah from the evils of our own selves and from the evils of our own actions. And whomsoever Allah guides, none can misguide. And whomsoever Allah leaves astray, none can guide back to the correct path. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. We testify there is no deity worthy of our worship except for Allah, who is alone with no partnership, and never has and never will be another. And we bear witness that Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, is the last and the final prophet of Allah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, brothers and sisters, friends and family, everybody tuning into the live stream, and everybody joining us for the Zoom meeting. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Today we're going to be continuing on our book reading of Those Promised Paradise by Noura Durkee. This will be pages 213 to 227. This chapter will be regarding Umar ibn Al-Khattab. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. And as I mentioned here first, that there's two narrations. The first being in Sahih Bukhari, this book 5, reference 43. We were with the Prophet ﷺ when he was holding Umar ibn Al-Khattab by the hand. And then it references the next part, Sahih Bukhari, book 5, reference 38, and Sahih Muslim, book 4, reference 5901, stating that the Prophet ﷺ had mentioned, if there were another prophet after me, it would have been Umar ibn al-Khattab. So Umar, radiallahu anhu, once told the story that once Rasulullah ﷺ asked for contributions for the sake of Allah, in those days, I was in possession of some wealth, and I thought to myself, time and again, Abu Bakr has surpassed me in spending for the sake of Allah. I shall, by the grace of Allah, surpass him this day, because I have just now a thing or two with me to spend. I went home, buoyant with the idea. I divided my whole property in two exactly equal parts. One of the parts I left for my people, and with the others I rejoined Rasulullah ﷺ, who asked me, did you leave anything for your family, Omar? He responded saying, yes, O Prophet of Allah. And how much, he inquired. Exactly 1/2, I answered. By and by, Abu Bakr came along with his load. It turned out that he had brought everything that he possessed. And I heard the conversation. Rasulullah ﷺ asked, what did you leave for your family, Abu Bakr? And he responded saying, I have left Allah and his Prophet for them. And on that day, Omar admitted to himself that he could never hope to surpass Abu Bakr. And it is hard to say which one was the greater or more humble in the end. But Omar was a man of great power, but his life was surrounded by controversy. Many people were afraid of him, and yet many people still admired him. Some people respected him, and some people hated him. And he remained a mystery, for when people thought that they had him figured out, he would then surprise them. And when they thought that he was cruel, he would be kind. And when they thought that he was fierce, he would be gentle. And when they thought him proud, he was humble. And when they thought him unaware, he proved to be the most conscious amongst them. And Omar's story is long and covers the entire beginning of modern Islam, from its infancy in the heart of Rasulullah ﷺ to many years after his death. So Omar was a member of the important Qurayshi family. He was brought up in the traditions of the time, which were the same amongst all the noble tribes and other families. He learned to hunt and to fight. He learned the good generosity to the visitor or to the guest. And he learned that he should always hold fast to the family and tribal traditions. And he learned to worship the gods that they thought controlled people's lives. And he learned that he, as a noble of Mecca, was a privileged person, and that people of lower class and lower power should defer to him. And Omar was an educated man, so he could read and write. And he was a strong man with dynamic energy that could be felt by all. He was a loyal friend and family member, but he had a temper. And people were careful not to make him mad. He had a deep sense of right and wrong, and he thought it necessary to uphold the traditions of his people. And he rarely questioned them or tried to change them because of his noble birth, his energy, his intelligence, and his strength. He had become a very important member of the Meccan community, and people tried to be his allies and avoided crossing him, and they listened to his opinions. So when Rasulullah SAW and his small band of followers began to propose a different form of worship that denied even the existence of many gods of the Quraysh, Omar was displeased to say the least. And a strong sense of tradition told him that this new faith was dangerous, for it insulted his gods, it insulted his ancestors, and it suggested that something was wrong in his city and that something was wrong in himself. So he refused to accept this and decided to fight it word and deed. And the Muslims, especially at that time, were few and weak. Many of them were poor and lacking the standing in the community, but their insistence on rightfulness and righteousness of their new faith annoyed and distressed the Quraysh. Like most other Meccan nobles, Omar participated in tormenting the new Muslims. They forced them to pray and meet secretly, for if they tried to come near to the Kaaba, they were shouted at or beaten or they were stoned. And Omar, who felt things very strongly, felt that the torture of the weak and the helpless was not enough. And he saw Islam as a cancer at the heart of Mecca, and he saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as the instigator. And working himself into a terrible temper, he decided to do something about the problem by using force. And one day he decided to make the intention to kill Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And on this day, Omar set off with his sword drawn to find his enemy, being Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And as he was striding throughout the streets of Mecca, he came upon an acquaintance of his who was secretly a Muslim. And this Muslim saw the naked sword and asked Omar where he was going. And Omar told him of his intentions to kill Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And desperately the man thought fast, how could he turn this danger long enough to run and warn Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Where he responded saying, Omar, hadn't you better look out for your own family first? Omar then said angrily, what do you mean by that? And he mentions in response to your sister and brother-in-law, you know that they listen to this new teaching, don't you? Why not take care of them first? And Omar was terribly upset at this response. So how could his own sister be a Muslim? Where then he quickly turned, he ran in the direction of her house, allowing the man enough time to warn Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, Muhammad had just recently been asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring either of either Omar or Abdul al-Hakam, another prominent noble, to Islam. And he wanted the new Muslims to have strength of one of these men, being a noble person with strength and prominence. So when he heard that Omar was coming with a drawn sword, perhaps he thought this would be the time. However, the other men around him were worried. They locked the door and prepared to fight. Meanwhile, Omar had reached his sister's house. He heard a voice reciting something, but the voice stopped suddenly when he came banging at the door. And inside, his sister and her husband had been listening to an older man, Khabab, reciting the Quran from a small written parchment. And they quickly hid both the man and the writing, as Omar had bursted in and accused them of being Muslim. And as we told in the previous chapter, his sister's refusal to renounce her new religion and his own attraction to the reading soon changed him. And Omar was a man who acted immediately on his convictions. He then went straight to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He arrived at the door with sword still in hand and called out, where is Muhammad? I want to profess my Islam. And the men who were waiting his arrival with swords in hand were shocked. Allahu Akbar, shouted Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as he embraced Omar, and his shahada was accepted and he joined the group, all of whom were shouting takbir with relief and pleasure and amazement at what seemed to be quite the miracle. And Omar was not at all content to stay in the house and pray in secret. He went straight to the Kaaba and he prayed in front of everybody, and they were too afraid of him to do anything. And after that, when he escorted Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam or any of the Muslims, they were able to make their salah and their tawaf at the Kaaba without being injured. And along with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's uncle Hamza and Omar Hamza, Omar was a great strength for all of them. So during these years of when Islam was being established in Medina, Omar was a staunch ally. Omar was at the center of activity. He was a leader in battle. He was a leader in worship. He was a leader in the inner jihad of transforming himself. We also know later on that Omar was the second of the Rashidun caliphates. Uh, the ahadith that he left us shows that a man who is truly dedicated to pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and is continually fighting with his own pride and his impulsiveness to bring them in line with the truth. And he had great insights, and several times he would foresee the revelation and advise Rasulullah about something that was soon sent down in the Quran. And he had the pleasure of seeing his daughter, Hafsa, married to Rasulullah and of becoming his father-in-law, just like Abu Bakr settled the disputes about the successor of Rasulullah by taking the hand of Abu Bakr and pledging his allegiance to him before the people. And under Abu Bakr, Omar continued his service, advising and helping his friend, for whom he had more and more awe. And just before Abu Bakr died, he nominated Omar as Khalifa, and people were worried. They said that he is too harsh, but Abu Bakr replied, the office will bring out his mercy, and it certainly did. And in response to a description of him being a responsible leader of the Ummah, throughout the Khalifa of Omar, there are stories of how merciful and tender-hearted that he became. He took seriously the advice of which he was given, stating, even if a sheep dies on the Euphrates River, you will be held responsible. He then walked the streets of Medina at night, listening and looking, seeing if everything was all right with the people, and making sure no one was breaking the law and that everyone had enough to eat. And one of these nights, bear with me a moment. One of these nights, he passed by the house of some people who sold milk for a living, and he heard voices coming out of the window, and the mother was encouraging her daughter to add some water to the milk. And the daughter protested, no, mother, that is wrong. If the people pay for milk, they should receive pure milk. To sell them water for the price of milk would be stealing. And the Khalifa was so pleased with the honesty of that girl that he found out who she was and arranged her marriage to one of his sons. And another night during these rounds, he and his slave Aslam saw a distant fire in the desert. He said, there seems to be a camp. Perhaps it is a caravan which could not enter the town due to nightfall. Let's go and look after them and arrange for their protection during the night. And there they had found a woman and some children. A woman had a kettle of water over the fire, and the children were crying. And Omar radiallahu anhu greeted her and, with her permission, approached them. He then asked, why are these children crying? And she responded saying, because they are hungry. And he asked, what is in the kettle? She responded saying, only water to soothe the children so that they may go to sleep and believe that food is being prepared for them. Allah will judge between Omar and me on the day of judgment for neglecting me in distress. And Omar responds saying, may Allah have mercy on you. How can Omar know your distress? And when he is our Emir, he must keep himself informed of us, was her response. So thus, Omar doesn't reveal himself. He returns to town and went to Beit al-Mal, filled with a bag of flour, dates of oil, clothes, and he also drew some money. And when the bag was ready, he told his slave Aslam to help put it on his back for him. And the slave protested, saying, no, please, Amir al-Mu'min, Amir al-Mu'min, I should carry this bag. But Omar had responded to this request, saying, what, will you carry my load on the day of judgment? I must carry this bag, for it is I who will be questioned about this woman. And they went, and Omar cooked food for the family, and when it was finished, the children were happy. And the woman said gratefully, may Allah reward you for your kindness. In fact, you deserve to take the place of Khalifa instead of Omar. And Omar replied, when you come to see the Khalifa, you will find me there. And on another occasion, Omar took on the role of a servant for the sake of Allah as well. But just want to comment before we continue. Mashallah, he doesn't admit, he doesn't get immediately offended, of what this person is saying. He keeps his, identity to himself. He doesn't, distinguish himself. How could you say something about that? He doesn't punish somebody for that. He goes and fulfills their right, provides for them, gives them more than what is necessary, and even when stating for that, And imagine that response. You'll see me there, alhamdulillah. You will find me there with the Khalifa, alhamdulillah. But on another occasion, Omar took on the role of the servant or a servant for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. During his reign, the Muslim armies were able to defeat the Byzantine forces in Jerusalem, Al-Quds, and the Christians in the city. It's a beautiful story regarding how he um, uh, interacted with them. If anybody's interested in this story, they have a lot of excellent documentaries regarding his interactions with them regarding this. But the Christians in the city asked for a peace treaty, and they expected a king to arrive with pomp and splendor. After all, his army was conquering the entire chartered world. But Omar had no use at all for pomp and splendor, and on the contrary, he hated all of that. He came traveling all the way from Medina with just one servant, and the two traveled the long distance along and across the desert. And as they only had one camel, they took turns riding it. And when they arrived at the city gates, it was the turn of his slaves in order to ride. So Omar arrived to sign the terms of the surrender of the city on foot, walking beside his servant on the camel, which amazed the leaders of the city. And Omar asked to be shown the city's landmarks, and he was at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is very important to the Christians. When it came time for prayer, he went outside and prayed nearby so that no one would try to turn that church into a masjid after he was gone. And he asked to see the rock of which Rasulullah had been raised to heaven on the night of the Miraj, and it was covered with garbage. But Omar anhu cleaned it with his own hands. And later Muslims built a dome of the rock and a Masjid al-Aqsa at this holy site. And Masjid al-Aqsa is the third holiest place of Islam. Alhamdulillah. It's interesting too that this is also the place that the foundation reference as the foundation stone in the Jewish religion. The disdain that comes a lot from the Christians at the time, who were originally the occupiers of Jerusalem at that time, the Byzantines. They had completely disregarded this point because the Jewish people considered this to be a holy site, but it was covered with trash. You know, and Omar Al-Khattab at that point then decided to preserve it, and even to this day, this is what we have as a distinguished beautiful holy sites. Although it's the reference of our holiest third holiest sites, Masjid al-Aqsa and the Dome of the Rock, are sometimes intermixed with one another, because the octagonal building that's there is not Masjid al-Aqsa, but it is relatively close to one another. Still referenced inside the middle of the city in Jerusalem. Nonetheless, almost justice is tough but fair is the next section that's here. It is mentioned that once a man was brought before him who had been caught stealing food. And the punishment for stealing is the loss of the hand. Omar asked the man to explain himself, and the man said that he had a family, but he did not make enough to support them. So Omar pardoned the man and blamed those around him for not being aware of their neighbor's plight. And another case of justice was brought by a poor Egyptian youth. During a horse race in Cairo, a young man had won a race, but had been pushed out of his rightful place as winner by the proud and arrogant son of the city's founder, Amr ibn al-As, who insisted that he himself had won. An Egyptian who knew that the Khalifa was supposed to be a fair man traveled all the way to Medina to demand justice. And Omar sent for Amr ibn al-As and his son, and when they arrived, he heard the whole story. He accepted the case of the young Egyptian and had both the father and the son flogged, and the son for injustice and the father for allowing it. And Omar was not going to give special privileges to anyone. And he thought that the rulers had to do more and be better than their constituents, not to take advantage of their positions or to be proud or lazy. And his dislike of material wealth were based on something that Rasulullah had said before that he died, saying, I don't fear for you the dangers of war, but the dangers of material wealth. And when Omar sent out governors to the new provinces and the territories, swiftly coming under the rule of the Muslims, he was always careful to see that they did not take any of the Muslims' money for themselves. And he monitored the way that they lived, they dressed, and they behaved, and he did not want any ruler to put himself up proudly above his people, but rather he wanted them to live simply and compassionately. And Omar himself was very careful not to waste the people's money, and he often worked at night and had two lamps and two containers of oil, and he was working on something for the Ummah. He had used one light whose oil was paid out by the public treasury, and if he was working for himself, he used the other light whose oil was paid out of his own pocket. And his tough justice extended heavily to himself. If he found that he had made a mistake, he tried to admit it and correct it immediately. And once he made a statement in the speech in the masjid concerning limiting mahr, the dower of for women. And all the women had gotten up and said in response to this, "You are wrong. The Quran does not limit the dower." And he did not do that in the time of, and we did not do that in the time of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And when he found that this was true, he changed the policy and thanked the old woman for her wisdom. And Omar was responsible too for several changes in the practice of Islam. He established a system of government with provinces, of governors, and taxes based on the Quranic guidance. And this system remained more or less until our modern times today. And he also established Tarawih prayers, the prayers during the month of Ramadan. One Ramadan, he saw some men in the masjid praying Tarawih separately, and Omar brought them together in one line to pray, an act in which all the Sahaba agreed. And when someone said that this was bid'ah, innovation, Omar replied that it was a good change, and Muslims have prayed that way ever since. And there's a reference in regards to the last part here about Omar being assassinated. So one day, at Salat al-Fajr, while Omar was leading the prayer, a non-Muslim slave came up behind him and stabbed him with a knife. And Omar grabbed the hand of Abd ar-Rahman ibn Auf, signaling him to complete the prayer. And all chaos broke loose in the masjid. The murderer ran off, stabbing in all directions, and killed 7 more people. And when a cloak was finally thrown over him, the intruder himself was killed. And Omar asked who had stabbed him and was thankful to Allah that it had not been a Muslim. SubhanAllah. Allahu Akbar. And the people were completely upset, hoping and praying their leader would not leave them, and he was carried to his house, and soon everyone knew he was dying. And a young man came and began to compliment him, saying how much he had pleased Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, how well he had served beside Abu Bakr, and how highly he was regarded among the Muslims. And Omar simply replied, "I hope that all these privileges will counterbalance my shortcomings so that I will neither lose nor gain anything." And Omar lived on for 4 more days, and during that time he kept on working, and he appointed a group of the respected companions to choose the next Khalifa. He advised them that whoever was chosen should be very considerate of the early immigrants and the Ansar, accept the good and excuse the wrong from among them, be good to the Arab Bedouins, the faithful and the honorable with those of other places and other religions who were protected by Islamic law. And he finished taking care of their personal debts and affairs, and he told his son Abdullah, "Go to the mother of the believers, Aisha, and say, Omar sends you greetings, but don't say the chief of the faithful believers, because today I'm not the chief of the faithful believers." And say Omar ibn Al-Khattab asked permission to be buried with his 2 companions. And Abdullah went and greeted Aisha and asked permission to enter. He found her sitting and weeping. He delivered the message, and she said, "I had an idea of having this place for myself, but today I prefer Omar to myself." So Abdullah returned to his father and delivered the message that Aisha had agreed. And Omar sighed, "Praise be to Allah, there is nothing more important to me than this." And he left instructions that when he died, they should go again to Aisha and take her permission. And they did this, and she let them bury Omar beside Rasulullah and Abu Bakr in Aisha's house. And we can, for those who visit Medina, we can see that today. So died this pillar of strength for the deen. Rasulullah SAW once said, "Among the nation of Bani Israel who lived before you, there were men who were inspired with guidance, though they were not prophets. And if there were any of these such people amongst my followers, it is Omar. And that's referenced in Sahih Muslim, Book 4, reference 5901. And it was several times that the case that Omar would express some opinions or idea that soon came as a revelation to Rasulullah, as we previously mentioned. The passing of the great man deeply affected many people, as Ibn Abbas anhu, recorded this in his account, that when the body of Omar was put on his deathbed, the people gathered around him, called upon Allah, and prayed for him before the body was taken away, and I was amongst them. And suddenly I felt somebody taking hold of my shoulder, and I found out that it was Ali ibn Abi Talib. And Ali asked Allah's mercy for Omar and said, "O Omar, you have not left behind you a person whose deeds I like to imitate and meet Allah with more than yours. And by Allah, I always thought that Allah would keep you with your two companions, for very often I used to hear Rasulullah saying, Abu Bakr, Omar, and I went somewhere. Abu Bakr, Omar, and I entered somewhere, and Abu Bakr, Omar, and I went out." So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shower his peace and his mercy upon the sincere leader of the Ummah and the close Sahabi of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And with that, we come to a close for today's reading. Jazakallah khairan for joining in, and we'll go ahead and close and follow up next week. Allahumma subhanaka bihamdi ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi